Anna is caught eating scraps under the stairs. Sung-hoon, a Korean mafia boss in a white suit, watches her from the light. The dry crust of bread tasted like dust and desperation against Anna's tongue. She pressed her spine harder into the damp, splintering wood of the underside of the stairs, trying to merge with the shadows. In the grand estate of the Thorne family, Anna Johnson was a ghost, a flicker of movement in the periphery that the wealthy owners chose to ignore. She had learned the hard way that invisibility was her only currency. To be seen was to be questioned, and to be questioned was to be cast back into the cold Texas night. But today, the silence of her sanctuary was shattered. The heavy oak door at the top of the cellar stairs groaned open, spilling a violent, clinical flood of golden light into her dark world. Anna froze, a half-chewed morsel of bread still tucked in her cheek. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, each thud echoing in her ears. She watched the silhouette of a man descend. He didn't move like the house staff or the erratic, drunken Thorne heirs. His footsteps were measured, heavy with the weight of absolute certainty. He reached the landing and stopped. Anna squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles white as she clutched the remaining scrap of bread to her chest. "Please, just pass by. Please don't look down. It is a very small piece of bread for such a large amount of fear." The voice was like velvet over gravel, deep, smooth, and chillingly calm. Anna's eyes snapped open. Standing less than 3 feet away was a man who looked like he had stepped out of a different universe. He wore a white suit so immaculate it seemed to glow in the dim cellar light. His face was a mask of sharp angles and unreadable intent, his dark eyes locked directly onto hers. Panic flared in Anna's throat. She scrambled back, her torn red dress catching on a stray nail, the fabric ripping with a sound that felt like a scream in the quiet room. Her breath came in jagged, shallow gasps. She looked for an exit, a hole, any shadow deep enough to swallow her. But the man's presence seemed to take up all the air in the room. I was leaving," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I'm going." Yoon Sung-hoon did not flinch. He didn't look at her with the disgust she expected, nor the predatory hunger she had spent her life fleeing. Instead, he watched her with a terrifyingly focused curiosity, as if he were reading the very map of her trauma written in the grime on her face. "Why are you hiding?" he asked. It wasn't a taunt. It was a clinical inquiry. "I'm not," she lied, her voice trembling as a single tear carved a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. Sung-hoon took a single step closer. The power radiating from him was palpable, a controlled authority that made the grand estate above them feel small. He looked at her chipped nails and the way she protected her meager meal. "You are a ghost," he said softly, his jaw setting. "But I have always had a talent for seeing things that are meant to stay buried." He reached out a hand, not to grab her, but palm up, an invitation that felt like a command. The golden light behind him framed him like a judge, and in that moment, Anna realized the shadows could no longer protect her. The world of scraps was over. The silence following Sung-hoon's words was heavy, filled only by the distant, rhythmic hum of the estate's ventilation and the frantic pulse in Anna's throat. His hand remained extended, steady as a mountain, while hers hovered near her chest, clutching the dry bread like a shield that had already failed. She looked at his palm, clean, lined with the faint calluses of a man who handled both pins and heavy consequences, and then back up at his face. The sternness she had first perceived wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It was no longer the gaze of a judge, but that of a navigator spotting a survivor in wreckage. I don't have anywhere else," Anna whispered, the confession tearing out of her with a jagged edge. "If I leave, I'm just a ghost in a different alleyway." Sung-hoon's eyes didn't flicker with pity. Instead, they darkened with a shared understanding. "There are many types of ghosts, Anna. Some hide under stairs. Others hide behind white suits and steel glass offices. But a ghost in my world at least has a door that locks." He leaned in slightly, the scent of expensive sandalwood and cold rain cutting through the cellar's musty air. "I am leaving this house in 5 minutes. My driver is waiting. I will not leave you here if you do not feel safe, but I will not force you into a different kind of cage. The choice to rise is yours." Anna looked up the stairs toward the golden light. Above her were the Thorns, people who looked at her without seeing her, who considered her presence a stain to be scrubbed away. Then she looked at the man in the white suit. He was dangerous. She could feel the lethality coiled in his stillness, the shadow operations her intuition whispered about. But for the first time in 24 years, someone had asked her what she felt. A sudden crash echoed from the floor above, a glass breaking, followed by the booming, entitled roar of the eldest Thorn's son. Anna flinched, her shoulders instinctively hunching to take up less space. Sung-hoon's jaw tightened. He didn't look up at the noise. His focus remained entirely on her. They will never see you, Anna. Even if you stood on their dining table, you would be invisible to them. With me, you will be seen. That is the danger, and that is the gift. Anna felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope, but a cold, hard defiance. She slowly let the bread fall from her hand. It hit the dirt floor with a soft thud, a discarded relic of her survivalist life. Her fingers, stained and trembling, reached out. When her skin finally touched his grip was firm and grounding, pulling her not just to her feet, but into a new reality. "I'm tired of being invisible," she said, her voice finding a sudden, sharp clarity. Sung-hoon nodded once, a gesture of grim respect. "Then stop hiding. Walk through the front door with me." The transition from the damp cellar to the interior of Yoon Sung-hoon's sedan was a silent, sensory assault. Anna sat pressed against the buttery leather of the back seat, her torn red dress a jagged stain against the car's pristine, cream-colored interior. She kept her hands tucked beneath her thighs, hiding the grime under her fingernails, afraid that even her touch might leave a mark that couldn't be washed away. Beside her, Sung-hoon remained a statue of composed power, his gaze fixed on the passing city lights of Dallas, yet his presence felt like a protective perimeter drawn around her. They arrived at a private dining suite in a hotel that shimmered with glass and gold. When the doors opened, the air smelled of lilies and expensive wax, a sharp contrast to the scent of mildew she had carried in her lungs for months. Sung-hoon led her to a table set for two, where the silver flatware caught the light like polished bone. "Eat," he said simply, gesturing to the spread that began to appear as if by magic. There was no discarded crust here. Instead, a bowl of juk, a delicate Korean porridge, was placed before her, followed by small porcelain dishes of glazed lotus root, steamed sea bass, and vibrant greens. The steam rose in fragrant plumes, warming her face, but Anna found herself paralyzed. Her hand hovered over a silver spoon, trembling so violently it rattled against the saucer. I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her voice sounding small and ragged in the cavernous luxury of the room. "I'm wearing a dead woman's dress, and I haven't showered in 3 days. I'm an imposter here." Sung-hoon reached out, not to touch her, but to pour a cup of barley tea. The amber liquid swirled rhythmically. "Imposters are people who pretend to be something they are not," he said, his voice steady and devoid of judgment. "You are not pretending to be hungry. You are not pretending to be tired. You are simply a woman who has been denied her place at the table." He picked up his own chopsticks, moving with a grace that made every action look like a ceremony. "In my world, we do not care where a person started. We care about where they are standing now. Right now, you are standing with me." Anna looked at the sea base, its white flesh flaky and perfect. She took a small bite, the flavors exploding on her tongue, salty, sweet, and rich. It was so overwhelming she felt a sob catch in her throat. She forced herself to swallow, then another bite, and another. For a moment, the shame of being seen vied with the sheer, primal joy of nourishment. She felt like a stray animal brought into a palace, waiting for the moment the guards would realize the mistake and throw her back into the ring. But as she looked across the table, she saw Sung-hoon watching her. There was no pity in his eyes, only a quiet, dark satisfaction, as if he were watching a masterpiece being restored, one brushstroke at a time. The meal ended as quietly as it had begun, but the satiated warmth in Anna's stomach did little to quiet the growing unease in her chest. As the porcelain plates were cleared, the air in the private suite seemed to sharpen, turning from the soft glow of a sanctuary into something more clinical and cold. Sung-hoon stood, his white suit still unblemished despite the evening's events, and gestured toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "You look at these lights and see a city of possibilities," he began, his voice dropping into that low, gravelly register that commanded the very shadows of the room. "I look at them and see a grid of debts and logistics." He pulled a thin, encrypted tablet from his pocket, laying it on the mahogany table. On the screen, a series of shipping manifests and digital ledgers flickered, lists of import-export goods that seemed benign at a glance, but were underscored by complex, tiered encryptions. "My family, the Yoon clan, has spent 3 generations building a bridge between Seoul and the West, Sung-hoon explained, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen. On the surface, we move textiles and technology. In the shadows, we move the capital that fuels the city's expansion. We provide the liquidity the banks are too afraid to touch. Money laundering is a crude term for it, but it is the blood that flows through our veins. Anna stepped closer, her heart beginning to pound again, but this time it wasn't from hunger. She looked from the digital numbers to the man standing beside her. "You're a criminal," she whispered, the word feeling heavy and dangerous on her tongue. "I am a son," he corrected, his jaw tightening. "My father did not leave me a choice. This empire is an inherited obligation, a cage made of gold and iron. If I walk away, the structure collapses, and hundreds of families who depend on our protection fall with it. My import-export business is a shield as much as it is a weapon." He turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable but intense. "I pulled you from under those stairs because I recognized the look in your eyes. You were trapped by a life you didn't choose. I am trapped by a life I cannot leave. I can offer you safety, Anna, and I can offer you a seat at this table. But you must understand that the light I stand in is filtered through the darkness of what I must do to keep it." The transition from the world of shadows to the harsh glare of her past happened faster than Anna could have braced for. 3 days after she had stepped out of the cellar, Anna stood in the lobby of the hotel, draped in a coat of soft charcoal wool that Sung-hoon had provided. She was waiting for him when the glass doors slid open, admitting a woman whose face was a mirror of Anna's own, though etched with the deep, bitter lines of a life spent judging others. "So, the ghost has finally decided to haunt the living." Her mother's voice was like a whip crack across the marble floor. Beatrice Johnson didn't look like a woman who had spent the last week searching for a missing daughter. She looked like a woman who had found a stain on her reputation. She marched toward Anna, her eyes raking over the expensive fabric of the coat, the clean glow of Anna's skin, and the quiet dignity of her posture. "Mom," Anna whispered, her voice failing her. "How did you find me?" "The thorns," Beatrice spat, her face contorting with a mix of shame and fury. "They told me you'd run off with some foreign businessman after being caught like a common thief in their cellar. I spent 20 years trying to make us respectable, Anna. I worked 3 jobs so you wouldn't have to look like a cliché. And here you are, selling yourself to the highest bidder." "It's not like that," Anna said, her hands trembling as she clutched the lapels of her coat. "He saved me. I was starving, Mom. I was hiding under the stairs because I was afraid of the world you pushed me into." "Saved you?" Beatrice laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "The word on the street is that your savior is a man who builds his throne on blood and dirty money. You think this is a fairy tale? You've traded your soul for a silk lining. You're nothing but a criminal's pet now." The shame that had lived in Anna's marrow for years surged back, hot and suffocating. She felt small again, the girl in the torn red dress eating scraps. Her mother's words were the safe lies she had been raised on, the idea that suffering in silence was better than being disreputable. "He's more honest about his darkness than you ever were about yours," Anna said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "You're a disgrace," Beatrice hissed, leaning in close, the scent of cheap perfume and old resentment cloying. "You think you're special because he put you in a fancy coat? To men like that, you're just a temporary distraction. When he's done with you, don't you dare come back to my door." Beatrice turned and vanished through the revolving doors, leaving a wake of silence that felt heavier than the cellar's darkness. Anna stood frozen, the ghost of her past having delivered its final blow. She was no longer hiding under the stairs, but the world was making it clear that the price of stepping into the light was the total destruction of the bridge behind her. The sting of her mother's rejection lingered like a cold draft, but it was the silence of the hotel suite that finally forced Anna to look upward. For days, she had been a passenger in Sung-hoon's life, a girl being polished and protected, but as she watched him pace the length of the mahogany office, she saw the cracks in his own armor. He was on a call, his voice a low, rhythmic cadence of Korean, His brow furrowed as he stared at a series of localized marketing proposals for a new development project in the city's historic district. He hung up, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry the weight of an entire board of directors. The local council is blocking the permits, he said, more to himself than to her. They see a foreign face and a shadow reputation, and they close ranks. They talk of community heritage, but they are really asking for a price I cannot calculate. Anna walked over to the desk, her eyes scanning the glossy brochures and the stiff, formal letters from the council members. She saw the names she recognized from the years she spent cleaning the offices of the city's elite, or overhearing their conversations while she waited in the corridors of power they thought she was too invisible to understand. They don't want money, Anna said softly, her finger tracing the letterhead of a prominent councilwoman. They want to feel like they aren't being bought. You're approaching this like a transaction, Sung-hoon. In this city, power isn't a currency, it's a narrative. Sung-hoon paused, his dark eyes narrowing as he turned to her. A narrative? You're pitching a development, she explained, her voice gaining a confidence that surprised them both. But this councilwoman, she's facing an election where her base feels forgotten. If you frame the project as a restoration of the neighborhood's soul, if you use the import side of your business to create a cultural center instead of just a warehouse, you give her a story to sell. You don't pay her off, you make her a hero. She pointed to a specific clause in the proposal. Change this. Stop talking about logistics. Start talking about legacy. I know these people. I've spent my life watching them from the corners. They are terrified of being irrelevant. Sung-hoon looked at the documents, then back at Anna. For the first time, he didn't see a woman he had rescued from a cellar. He saw a strategist who had turned a lifetime of forced observation into a lethal weapon of intuition. He realized that while he understood the mechanics of the shadow, Anna understood the heartbeat of the light. I spent my life trying to take up less space so they wouldn't notice me, Anna whispered, a small, sharp smile touching her lips. I never realized that meant I was the only one in the room actually listening. Sung-hoon reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the desk. Then stop listening from the corners, Anna. Sit at the desk. Help me rewrite the story. The fragile momentum of their partnership was shattered by a single, vibrating phone call in the middle of the night. The sound was abrasive in the quiet luxury of the suite, a digital intrusion that signaled the end of their brief reprieve. Sung-hoon didn't need to speak for Anna to know the world had tilted. The way he sat upright, his face draining of what little warmth it had held, told her everything. My father, he said, his voice a hollow echo of its usual command. A hemorrhagic stroke. He is alive, but the line of succession is already fraying. By dawn, the suite was a hive of frantic, hushed activity. Suitcases were snapped shut, and encrypted phones buzzed incessantly. This Seoul crisis wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a geopolitical earthquake for the Yoon clan. In the vacuum of his father's consciousness, the shadow operations were suddenly without an anchor, and Sung-hoon's cousins and rivals in Seoul were already moving to seize the manifests. I have to go back, Sung-hoon said, standing by the window where the rising sun caught the sharp, morning edge of his silhouette. If I am not there to claim the seat, the empire will be torn apart by men who do not believe in shields, only weapons. Anna felt the familiar coldness of the cellar beginning to creep back into her limbs. And me? Do I go back to being a ghost? Sung-hoon turned, and for the first time, the Mafia boss looked vulnerable. The board in Seoul, they are traditional. They see a woman like you as a liability, a distraction I found in the West. If you come with me now, you walk into a den of wolves who will use your past to destroy us both. But if you stay here, you are a target for those who want to hurt me. He walked toward her, taking her face in his hands. His grip was desperate, a silent plea for her to understand the inherited obligation that was pulling them apart. I am going to Korea to fight for my life. I need you to stay here and fight for the narrative we started. Keep the permits. Build the center. Be the anchor I can return to. The power struggle had officially begun, stretching across 10,000 miles of ocean. Anna watched from the balcony as his black car pulled away, heading for the private terminal. The luxury around her suddenly felt like a gilded cage again. She was no longer hiding under the stairs, but she was standing on a battlefield where the enemy was invisible, and the man who had seen her was disappearing into the clouds. She looked at the proposal on the desk, the language of power they had drafted together. She realized that if Sung-hoon failed in Seoul, She would lose more than a protector. She would lose the only person who had ever looked at a scrap eater and seen a queen. The nights in Dallas felt colder without the hum of Sung-hoon's presence, but the work on the community center had become Anna's spine. She was no longer hiding. She was building. However, the shadows Sung-hoon had warned her about didn't disappear just because he was across the ocean. They simply grew hungrier. Leaving the construction site late one Tuesday, the fluorescent lights of the parking garage flickered with a rhythmic, dying buzz. Anna reached for her car door, her mind still racing with permit codes and floor plans, when a black SUV swerved into the adjacent stall, blocking her exit. Two men stepped out. They weren't the polished professionals of the Yoon clan. They were jagged, wearing the cheap leather and hard eyes of a rival faction looking for a shortcut to leverage. Anna Johnson, the taller one said, his voice echoing off the concrete. He held up a grainy photograph, an image of her from weeks ago, huddled in her torn red dress, looking like a discarded animal. Quite the promotion. From eating scraps in a cellar to running a mafia boss's portfolio. We wonder what the city council would think if they knew their visionary was just a common thief Sung-hoon picked up off the floor. Anna's breath hitched. The old shame surged, a cold tide threatening to pull her back under the stairs. What do you want? We want the access codes to the North Texas manifests, the man sneered, stepping into her personal space. He reached out to grab her arm, his fingers tightening with a familiarity of violence that made Anna's blood run cold. Give us what we want, or we'll make sure everyone sees the ghost for what she really is. I don't think she'll be giving you anything. The voice didn't come from Anna. Out of the shadows of a nearby pillar, three men emerged. They were dressed in the same immaculate, dark suits as Sung-hoon's personal guard, their movements synchronized and lethal. One of them, a man named Min-ho whom Anna recognized as Sung-hoon's most trusted enforcer, stepped forward. He didn't look at the rival thugs. He looked at the hand on Anna's arm. "Remove your hand," Min-ho said, his tone as flat and sharp as a razor. The rival laughed, reaching for a holster under his jacket, but he was too slow. In a blur of motion, Min-ho intervened. The sound of a wrist snapping echoed through the garage, followed by a grunt of agony. Within seconds, the two attackers were pinned against their own SUV, the dangerous side of the Yoon Empire revealing itself in the brutal, efficient silence of the struggle. Min-ho turned to Anna, his expression shifting back to one of professional deference. "Mr. Yoon was very clear, Miss Johnson. No one from your past is allowed to touch you. Not while you belong to the light we are building." Anna looked at the men on the ground, then at the photo of her former self lying in the oil-stained concrete. She didn't feel like a victim. For the first time, she looked at the violence required to protect her and didn't flinch. She realized that being seen meant being defended, and the shadow of the Yoon clan wasn't a cage, it was a wall. "Get them out of here," she said, her voice steady. She stepped over the photograph, leaving the girl under the stairs behind forever. The adrenaline from the parking garage confrontation eventually faded, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. As Min-ho drove her back to the hotel, the silence in the car wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of a threshold being crossed. Anna looked at her reflection in the darkened window, the charcoal wool coat, the steady gaze, the hands that had finally stopped shaking. She realized that the safe world her mother and the Thorns occupied was built on a different kind of violence. One that starved the soul and demanded total invisibility. Inside the suite, the glow of the Dallas skyline felt like a map of her new territory. She picked up the encrypted phone Sung-hoon had left her. It buzzed almost immediately with a secure video feed. Sung-hoon appeared on the screen, the stark morning light of Seoul highlighting the exhaustion etched into his features. He looked at her, his eyes searching for any sign of the ghost he had found under the stairs. "Min-ho told me what happened," he said, his voice a low vibration of restrained fury and relief. "I am sorry that my world bled into yours, Anna. I never wanted you to see that side of the shield." "It's okay," Anna replied, her voice surprising her with its steel. "For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being crushed. I was the one being protected." Sung-hoon leaned back, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "In Korea, the board is demanding I settle the succession by marrying into a clean family, one that provides a political facade for our operations. They call it a safe truth. They say it's the only way to secure the legacy." Anna thought of her mother's bitter face and the Thorns' calculated neglect. Those were the safe truths she had fled, lives lived in the light that were hollow and cruel at their core. She looked at Sung Hoon, a man who moved in shadows but had never lied to her about the dark. A safe lie is still a cage, Sung Hoon, she said, leaning toward the screen. You told me once that the light you stand in is filtered through the darkness. I'd rather stand in that filtered light with you than live in a clean house where I'm not allowed to exist. Anna, if you choose this, there is no going back, he warned, though his eyes burned with a sudden, desperate hope. You will be a part of the shadow operations. You will be the woman beside the man the world fears. I spent my life being a ghost because the world refused to see me, Anna said, a sharp, defiant smile touching her lips. I'll take the shadows. At least there, I'm real. The choice was made. She wasn't just a marketing strategist or a rescued girl. She was choosing the dangerous truth of the Yoon Empire. She was stepping into the shadow, not to hide, but to rule it. For the first time, Anna Johnson didn't want to be invisible. She wanted to be the most dangerous thing in the room. 6 months later, the community center stood as a testament to a new kind of power in Dallas. It was a structure of glass and light, exactly as Anna had envisioned, a place where the neighborhood's invisible residents were finally seen. Anna stood on the mezzanine, looking down at the bustling opening gala. She was no longer the girl in the bruised red dress hiding under the stairs. She was the senior executive of the project, a woman whose name carried a weight that no one dared to ignore. A familiar warmth settled behind her. She didn't have to turn to know it was Sung Hoon. He had returned from Seoul 3 days prior, having secured his position as the head of the Yoon clan. The power struggle had been brutal, but he had emerged not just as a successor, but as a reformer. The narrative held, he said softly, his voice a low vibration near her ear. He looked out at the crowd, then at her. He was dressed in a black suit this time, less like a judge and more like a partner. You did more than secure a permit, Anna. You built an anchor. We did, she corrected, turning to face him. The hotel suite had been a sanctuary, and the warehouse a secret, but here, in the bright light of the center's lobby, the truth felt different. It was no longer a secret to be ashamed of, it was a foundation. Sung Hoon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He didn't drop to a knee, he didn't need to. Their relationship had never been about traditional theatrics. It was about a shared understanding of the shadows. He opened the box to reveal a ring set with a black diamond, flanked by 2 shards of brilliant white light. I'm not asking you to be a passenger in my world, he said, his eyes locking onto hers with a piercing intensity. And I'm not offering you a rescue. I'm asking for a partnership. A life where we build a world that belongs to both of us. One where you never have to make yourself smaller again. Anna looked at the ring, then at the man who had seen her when she was a ghost. She thought of her mother, who was currently at home, silent and defeated by Anna's success. She thought of the thorns, whose influence had withered while hers grew. I'm done with small spaces, Anna said, her voice resonant and clear. She reached out, her hand steady as she took the ring. I choose the world we build together. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the ghost was officially gone. In her place stood a woman of the shadow and the light, standing beside a king, ready to rule a world that finally knew her name.